Now, there were like a couple of American citizens who felt that there was their civic duty to turn around and don the mantle of Captain America. Now, these are just regular average Joes, like a baseball player by the name of Bob Russo, who pretty much could have pulled it off, but on his first mission, he broke his arm. And then there was an unlikely individual by the name of Scar Turpin, who was a biker thug. Now, this guy right here, check this out. In trying to foil a mugging, he actually got mugged. So, therefore, he's out the door. But then there was one individual who seemed very, very determined to take on the mantle of Captain America. And that was an individual by the name of Roscoe. Now, Roscoe was pretty much trying to seek out Steve Rogers with the hope of being trained to become the next Captain America. He couldn't find Rogers, but he found one of Rogers' closest friends, Sam Wilson, also known as the Falcon. Now, Wilson, he trained Roscoe into becoming the next Captain America, and eventually that day would come. But not too long after Roscoe becomes the 5th Captain America, the Red Skull caught news of this event, and he would see to it that both Roscoe and the Falcon was kidnapped and captured. Now, the Skull, he went to unmask this Captain America, thinking that it was the original, Steve Rogers. But when he turned around and unmasked him, he realized that it wasn't. He realized that it was another individual, and that his name was Roscoe. So what did the Skull do? He beat the stew out of Roscoe. In fact, I'll go even further to say that he beat and bludgeoned Roscoe to death. And he left him on a roof, bloodied and bludgeoned, as a warning to Steve Rogers. Steve Rogers caught a hold of this warning, and then he realized that the world does need a Captain America. So he would abandon that nomad identity and automatically resume his role as Captain America. Now, Sharon Carter, she at this point was a SHIELD associate to the NYPD. And on this mission, she was brainwashed by a villain by the name of Dr. Faustus. Now, in the cast of this brainwashing, she would pick up a bomb, she would take it to the middle of Central Park, and she would detonate it. Supposedly, the explosion kills her. Now, Fury had the unenviable task of being the bearer of bad news and having to tell Cap of Carter's death. And this did not sit well with Cap at all. But it also didn't sit well with Fury, because Fury was divided on loyalty to one of his best friends and loyalty to the mission and one of his best agents who was still alive and still out there. And it would have to remain that way by Cap staying out of the loop. Now, as for Carter, she was still on this mission. But at one point, when she had failed to report in, automatically she was presumed dead. Word of this would get out, but Captain America would never know of Sharon Carter's true death. Now, once again, Rogers and Monroe, the same ones, they were released from suspended animation, but this time it was by Dr. Faustus. Faustus would then turn around and brainwash the insane Steve Rogers as if he needed to be brainwashed anymore, and then he would rename him the Grand Director. Now, the director would first turn around and put together a group of neo-Nazis called the National Force. And in one battle with Captain America, the director then turned around and the director would pick up a device much like Sharon Carter used to detonate herself, and he would ignite this device and it would detonate and he would die in the explosion. So now the insane Steve Rogers is dead, and now the only one that's left is the original Steve Rogers. As for Jack Monroe, he would be captured and cured by the agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Then, as an act of faith, he would then turn around and he would go under the guise of Cap's other identity as the second Nomad. Now, at this time also, the Red Skull, he began to get up in his years. He started aging. So he called in the assistance of an ex-Nazi scientist by the name of Dr. Armin Zola. And Zola would then create a clone, a younger clone, in the likeness of Steve Rogers. From there, he would have a procedure operation, whereas he would transplant the Red Skull's brain. He would transplant Smith's brain out of the Red Skull's body and put it into the younger Steve Rogers looking body. Now, Zola was noted for pretty much these transplants that he did during World War II. In fact, his most famous at that time was when he had transplanted the brain of Adolf Hitler out of his aging body into the body of a supervillain by the name of the Hate Monger. Now, with the Red Skull having a brand new cloned body and a brand new looking identity, he took on an even further identity, that of a businessman by the name of John Smith. Now, John Smith became pretty much an adamant businessman. He also became very, very powerful in government affairs, and he even had a political seat. His whole thing pretty much was to govern the commission on superhero activities. Now, from his post, of course, naturally, he had a puppet. So he pretty much was using the services of a committee chairman by the name of Douglas Rockwell, who would then turn around and go into top secret military files, and he would find a file on Steve Rogers, pretty much that discredited him for back pay during the 1980s for services going all the way back to World War II. Now, in light of this, Steve Rogers would be removed from his role as Captain America. Now, Rogers, somewhat in a fit of rage, would then go on to become a renegade superhero, right? Go figure. How does that work? Well, Rogers made it work. He called himself the Captain, and instead of wearing the symbolized red, white, and blue, he would go on by wearing red, white, and black.